My name is Estelle Erasmus, and I'm the host of the podcast Freelance Writing Direct. And I'm here to talk to you about podcasting made easy. So I'm going to share my screen and let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a writing instructor at NYU. I'm a contributing editor for Writer's Digest. And my book, Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, has been named a best book for writers by Poets and Writers magazine. Freelance Writing Direct can be found on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify, and also on my website at estelleserasmus.com/podcast. And at this moment in time, I have over 100 episodes, including top authors like Cheryl Strayed, Ann Hood, editors from HuffPost Personal, Wired, and so much more, including publishing professionals like Jane Friedman and HarperCollins' Lisa Sharkey. So why am I speaking to you today? I want to talk to you about the interest in podcasts. It's such a booming area. So let's go to it. If you want to create a podcast with impact, it involves several key steps from planning and production to marketing, and maybe if you're lucky, monetizing it. So here is a guide to help you get started and go along the path towards success. So, what is podcasting? In a kind of very easy, succinct way to understand it, it's really like radio. It's radio 2.0. It's audio storytelling on demand, but it can today have a video aspect. Like, for example, Freelance Writing Direct. 6 months after it started, I moved it to YouTube as well as iTunes and Spotify. And to find an audience, you can look to other venues where you are. So if it's a writing podcast, you probably have some sort of a writing community or some other business community. So I'm going to share some tips with you to help you start and succeed with your podcast based on my experience and what I've learned getting my podcast into the top 5% of podcasts. So, a great thing about podcasting is you can build on your platform, you can build a platform, even if you start small. It helps you with your personal branding, it helps you engage with your audience. It, like I said before, you can monetize as it gets bigger, and there are opportunities in a variety of ways for that. And it's really a great way to network and to build up your contacts in the industry. So, how do you start? You identify your niche. You figure out what it is that you're interested in podcasting about. And ideally, it's something that you have expertise in. For me, I've been a magazine editor in chief of 5 national publications. And I've been somebody who's been in publishing on both sides of the publishing wall for 3 decades. And so I knew that it would be focused on authors and writers and editors and agents and everybody in publishing to distill the information, the tips, the tricks, the strategies that I learned and that I teach my students from the 3 decades I have of experience. So you look into your niche. What is it? Is it business? Is it humor? Is it health? Is it specifically on essays? And then research other podcasts. And one of the things I talk about in my book, Writing That Gets Noticed, is I have Estelle's Edge, which are really my pro tips on what you should do. And so one of my Estelle's Edge when it comes to this is look at something called listennotes.com, and you can look up other podcasts in your niche. You can certainly do that through iTunes and Spotify as well. And so pick your theme, pick your topic, decide what it is, and decide on the format. Are you going to just do solo episodes, meaning it's just you sharing your expertise? That's great if you've really built something in the industry. Or are you going to do a panel? Are you going to have several people each time? Or are you going to have a co-host even? I started with a co-host, and then there were business changes and my co-host wasn't as available. And so I ended up doing it myself. And I love being the solo host, but I have guests. I also do bonus episodes and choose your length. So it's usually between 20 to 60 minutes, but they kind of say that the best ones are to do the shorter, like kind of walk the dog, take the kids to school timing, because people have shorter attention spans in this day and age. And then choose your frequency. Freelance Writing Direct is a weekly podcast, so it comes out with a new episode every week. Most people choose this, but there are people that do bi-weekly or monthly podcasts. My Estelle's Edge is if you follow a regular schedule, whatever that is, and I do recommend a weekly schedule, you will build your audience over time because they know what to look for. And I think it's a very effective technique. So then you have to give your podcast a name. What is it going to be? I called mine Freelance Writing Direct because I knew that it was going to be talking to writers of every ilk. And that includes authors. I mean, authors are freelancers, they're not working full time for a publisher. And direct, meaning the information goes direct to you. So give it a memorable and catchy name and think about SEO. That's really what's, the keywords and words that are going to come up in search, and try to include that in your description. So for me, it's writing. For me, it's freelancing. And then you can add more to your description of your name. I think in my description, it talks about, information and advice from editors and agents and publishing professionals and distilling information, all those kind of juicy keywords. And of course, make sure that the availability is there, because if you're going to do it on social media, you want to make sure that you're able to use whatever name you're choosing. And I always think a great piece of advice is to look for the most popular podcast in the niche you're trying to work in, and make your title as long as theirs is. So if there's a big long title, maybe you want to try and mimic that, or if it's a shorter title. And I do happen to think that shorter titles are effective. And then you have to add that extra element of what you do. And that's where it comes to figuring out what's your best content and what you have to offer your audience. Create your brand. You have to have a logo. You have to have great artwork, but it doesn't have to be expensive. You can just make sure something is eye-catching. For me, I have the logo for Freelance Writing Direct with my photo. And it's just very clean, very simple. You can check out Canva, you can check out Fiverr to get someone to help you, or you can make your own logo in Canva or somewhere else if you have that kind of expertise. And then you need to select music to have, they call it the intro and the outro. And the intro is just like that introduction to your podcast. So again, I would listen to how other podcasts do that you admire and model yours after those. And there are so many options to find royalty-free music, meaning you do not have to pay to license the music, which is absolutely what you want to do. And if you are going to use a photo, you want to make sure that it's a photo that you don't have to pay licensing for. So Creative Commons will often have that, and there are other places you can do a Google search to find those photo options. But for music, you can go to app.soundstripe.com, pixabay.com, Creative Commons Music, and Artlist.io for your royalty-free music. And then you want to create a show notes template, and you can model the ones from your favorite podcasts. So my show notes are always on iTunes. They're always on Spotify. And so you can go and look and see how somebody is doing their show notes and use it as a template for yourself. You have to have essential equipment. It's not like you have to go to a studio and do a big thing in a studio, but you need the basics. And so that's a microphone. And I have some suggestions. I think that Blue Yeti, which is what I have, is really terrific. And again, you don't have to break the bank with these microphones. You can also consider an Audio Technica or a Shure. And for headphones, I don't recommend earbuds. They could fall out of your ear. They don't always have the closest contact with the ear. If you're somebody who has a hearing impairment, earbuds won't work at all. So closed back headphones are the best, and I like Bose. And recording software, if you aren't going to have a producer, you will need to do it yourself using something like Audacity, Adobe Audition, or other software, which you can definitely Google and find out. If you're looking for a producer, you might want to go to your local university or ask around or go to somebody who has a podcast, and often they mention their producer. But in the beginning, you probably want to save on the money and see how that's going to go. Your recording setup, you need a quiet space. And that's because you don't want the reverberation from your voice. You don't want to have any kind of an issue with your voice. So you want to soundproof your area. Now, a little trick is some people just start in their closet. They do a setup in their closet because it's really insulated. There's not a lot of reverberations of sound. And it's a great way to start. You have to silence your cell phones and any other digital phones that you may have or wall phones. And that just helps with the background noise. And have lighting facing you to shine light on your face. People have a ring light. I have like a small stacked light right in front of my computer. I have a side light as well that I can move around different times of day. So that could be really helpful so you get the best lighting. So you need podcast recording and editing tools, and it's particularly important if you don't have a podcast producer. So to get the best recording, you can use GarageBand, Audacity, Zencaster, and you want to make sure that the editing tools cut the dead air, remove noise, adjust levels. Like if you have a guest, you want to make sure that you're talking at the same level, and you can do that with recording tools. Software tools are perfect for editing. Again, if you don't have a producer, I would definitely invest in Descript or Adobe Audition. Hosting and distribution, you want to have a hosting system. So there are different platforms. I use Libsyn, which I think is a terrific platform. There's also Anchor, Buzzsprout, Podbean, and you would submit to directories. A producer could do that for you, or you could do it for yourself. And I think if you set up with Libsyn, they do it automatically for you. It goes to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. And you need an RSS feed because this is the way that your audience can access your content. You can find it on your hosting platform, or you could even create a free RSS.com account and get one that way. So the optimal episode structure and flow is to be engaging, have an engaging opener, music, and maybe an episode overview. I like to say, in this episode, we're talking to this guest about her new book or something like that. And for your main content, you plan to have interviews, discussions, storytelling. And I always recommend my Estelle's Edge is to set up some bonus solo episodes. I do that with publishing intel or my kind of feelings about what's happening in the industry to show the credibility and the expertise that I have. And I think that really adds, it's not just that I'm an interviewer, it's that I have something to bring to the table as well. The outro is what I mentioned before. That's the end of the podcast. There's usually music. It could be the same music that you started with. It's a call to action. Follow us, follow along, um, follow on this website, follow on iTunes, sign up for YouTube, and you might want to preview the next episode or just talk about something that's happening that you want to make sure that you're promoting. Your usual outro will just be the regular one that you'll have for every episode, and that'll just be put at the end. So you could just make it a very standard thing, like, and you usually ask for them to rate and review on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube. And you can also mention your Substack. I mentioned my Substack, estelleerasmus.substack.com at the end. That's in my outro. So, how do you grow your audience? You grow it through social media promotion. You can use Headliner to create audio clips and Opus Pro to create video clips, little short 30, 60, 90-second promos, which are great. If you have an email newsletter, and I have estelleerasmus.com, I do a regular weekly post, and I include information about the show, my show notes, the iTunes and YouTube links for the podcast. And I always try to include something a little personal about my connection to the guest because I don't take unsolicited guests. I go reach out to the guests that I want to have on the show, and I usually know them in some way. And you can collaborate with other podcasters. So if you're a guest on their show, invite them to be a guest on yours because you know them this way, and vice versa. So leverage SEO. Those are the different keywords in your titles, in your descriptions. And you can do hashtags with the words that you want to use in your blog post, even, and optimize the website as well. So if you're using your website or if you're using Libsyn, you can put hashtags in the show notes. I'm a little remiss. I don't always do that, but I'm planning to do that as well as for YouTube. And then for monetization, of course, in the beginning, you're not going to monetize, but eventually you could try for sponsorship and ads. And you could even ask for donations, for listener donations on Substack or Patreon. For my Substack, for paid subscribers, I offered them bonus clips from the podcast that are only for subscribers. You can even set up merchandise on Zazzle.com or Printful.com. You can do mugs, you can do hats, you can do pens. That's something that I'm planning to do because I think it's a great opportunity to get the name out there. And premium content is, again, some people do paid subscriptions. As I mentioned, I do the bonus clips for Substack subscribers. Analytics, you want to track your metrics, which is the downloads, the listeners, the retention rate. And you can look at Spotify for podcaster, listen notes, which I mentioned earlier. You can take a poll on listen notes, which I love. You can just set it up and say, what do you want me to work more on this podcast? You can do it through your social media. You can do it through your website. And you want to kind of adjust as you see what people are saying or the feedback you're receiving, even on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. And then you could adjust content based on interest or the comments that people give you on social media. And then there's legal and copyright issues. So as I said with music, you want to use royalty-free music. And then you want your guests to sign a release form for interviews. And it should ensure that you have the legal right to use the guest's voice, image, and likeness in your podcast and for promo purposes. And future use, it allows you to repurpose the content for future projects, monetizing it, creating other media. And it also clarifies if you monetize your podcast through sponsorships or ads, a release can clarify that a guest won't receive a share of any revenue. And without a signed release, a guest could potentially request that their episode be removed or restrict how you can use it later on. And there are ways around it as well. If you don't want to do that, you in an email you say that, this represents this, that, and the other, and that we tape both audio and video and all that. But if you want to see an agreement, you can email me at freelancewritingdirect@gmail.com and ask for a sample of the agreement. And you need to follow fair use and copyright laws and make sure that the person that you're speaking with owns their content. And that's why a big reason that I know the people that are on my podcast, and that you have ownership of the content that you're sharing. Be consistent. Create a content calendar. I just do mine on a Google Doc, and I kind of know what's coming down the pike. And I batch record episodes, like I'll do maybe 2 a week. And this allows me to, during like holidays and vacations, already have things in the till. So right now I have like months of content and months scheduled. So I'm way ahead of myself. So even if I need to take time off, and maybe 1 week I'm off doing something with my teenage daughter and I don't have time to schedule episodes, or I'm teaching at NYU, or I'm teaching an intense Zoom class, which I'm doing now for private coaching clients, I don't have to do the tapings. And just maintain a consistent schedule. I publish a podcast episode every week, and sometimes I do bonus episodes, which are often solo episodes or something very special. And, common challenges are time management. And I think I gave you tips on how to deal with that. And avoid pod fads. Like everybody's doing this one thing, like everyone's covering TikTok on their podcast. I mean, if it's relevant to your content, yes, absolutely do it. But don't just jump on the bandwagon, because the bandwagon moves very fast. And dealing with negative feedback, I mean, you have to take everything with a grain of salt. I mean, people love to make comments and suggestions, but you are the only one who knows if it's valid and if it's something that really will work for you. And for me, it's in the spirit and the intent of how the feedback is given. And my final tips for success is, passion first, focus on your why. Why are you doing something? Why are you doing this podcast? For me, I started my podcast before my book launched in 2023, because I knew I wanted to build a venue, to have a vehicle, to have guests, and to start, being able to have my book in the background. And I knew I was doing a lot of work with NYU and Writer's Digest and becoming a contributing editor. And so there was a lot of information that I wanted to share. And engage with your audience, which is really just continue to elicit their feedback and, share their positive comments. If someone shares something nice that they've said about the podcast, I make sure that I retweet it or I put it on Instagram. Always keep learning and improving, and just be patient with yourself and persistent, and don't give up. Keep going. And as long as you enjoy it, I love podcasting. I wrote on my Substack, it's sort of like being a magazine editor in chief. I curate content, I share my own expertise, and I'm able to really continue building my platform and my audience, and really helping my listeners and viewers in their writing and publishing journey, and helping them to get noticed. So I wish you so much success with yours. And let's talk a little bit about interviewing. There are a couple of tips that you need to know. So you need to research the guest, know who they are. I always do a deep dive in my guest and research their work, their achievements, and their background. And I prepare open-ended questions. And that's really like not just saying like, what is your birthday? It's saying like, when you started writing your book, what made you excited about writing your story? That's an open-ended question. They can talk about their background. They can talk about something that happened. They can talk about an influence in their life. And a lot of people send questions in advance. I don't necessarily do that, but because I want to keep it fresh, but I send the idea of what we're going to cover in 30 to 45 minutes, and that helps the guest feel comfortable. Of course, make sure your equipment is working. I always plug in my mic and test my mic and make sure that, it's all set up perfectly. And to build rapport with your guest, you start with small talk. You ease into conversation with a casual chat before you even start recording and compliment their work. Obviously, they're on your podcast because you admire them in some way. You admire what they're doing. And so I'm always very enthusiastic. And try to have a signature statement. Mine is that I put post-it notes in the books of my guests because I admire and highlight some of the work and the passages that I find meaningful that we then talk about on the podcast, and be an active listener. Again, I have my questions, but I don't stick to it. You will rarely see me going, looking at each note on the page, because I'm letting the conversation free flow. I'm guiding it in the way because I know there are things I want answered, but I'm kind of following and being an active listener, and I'm maintaining eye contact with my guest as well. And bottom line, have fun. If you have a great attitude, I mean, I call it a chat. It's very casual, but it is also very professionally focused, because my goal is to make sure that I'm getting really strong tips, tricks, strategies, and actionable writing advice for the people who listen to and view my podcast. And then get the guests to share the episode, right? So making it about them and highlighting their achievements make them feel proud to share it. And you could create assets, like I mentioned before. Headliner does audio clips, Opus Pro, and there are other places as well. They'll do video clips. You can make quote cards from Canva. I haven't been doing that, but I know a lot of people do it, and I'm going to start doing it. And then you can have custom banners. And I always send a thank you after I speak with the guest, and also after the episode goes live. And I ask them nicely to share the episode. And then, of course, I share them and tag them on social media. And that makes it easy for them to reshare with their audience. So make sure to listen and watch Freelance Writing Direct with me. That's my logo. And a special offer: if you sign up for my newsletter at estelleserasmus.com, you'll receive my pitching guide. And my Substack is estelleserasmus.substack.com, where my latest clip is an interview with the editor from The Cut, from my Editor on Call series that I do for NYU. I'm on Instagram, X, TikTok, and Threads at Estelle S. Erasmus. And my email, and I'm always happy to receive emails, is freelancewritingdirect@gmail.com. And I wish you so much success and help and hope and love. And I can't wait to see your podcast and to hear from you. And you will get your podcast noticed. See what I did there? Have a great day. Bye-bye.